Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Kings Talk, the off-season edition, Volume 1. The Kings wrapped up their season with a 31-41 overall record. They have missed the playoffs for the 15th consecutive season, and now we are hearing from members of the team and the front office. And of course, it's your favorite Sacramento sports reporters, ABC 10's Lina Washington, Sean Cunningham, and our friend over at the Locked On Kings podcast network, Matt George. That is your source for daily Kings content. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about already. In day 2 of these exit interviews, we've heard from the first-year general manager, the second-year head coach, the point guard who's recovering from COVID, and some players who may or may not be here in a couple months, guys. What was your big takeaway from these first 2 days of media availabilities? And obviously, we know that head coach Luke Walton is going to remain the head coach. We heard that reinforced by Monte McNair today. So initial reactions, thoughts, takeaways from our first off-season availabilities.
Well, it's great that they got to it early. And I think we all expected that no matter what was going to happen with Luke, that they were going to address it early and early enough to where after this week you can move on. Well, fortunately, it was only a few hours after that they were able to move on and get the off-season rolling. And I think there's some really uncomfortable conversations that have been had, not only with the roster, but with Luke and Monty, and obviously ownership and Joe Dumars, the advisor, and the entire front office situation. So, and they're going to continue. Those difficult, uncomfortable conversations are going to continue. There's going to be a lot of decisions ahead. You hate to make too much out of one thing, because every year, how often do we say this when you're looking at 15 straight years without the playoffs? But every year someone goes, oh, this is the most important offseason in Kings history. And it's not. It's just, you have to look at it in perspective. Like, just, you got to break down the door, right? And Monte McNair, I think, look, he no one expected him to come out and say, Luke's my guy for now. Okay. He obviously has a great working relationship with Luke. He respects Luke. But I think the one thing he said that was rather definitively, that even I was a little bit shocked at, was the fact he said I believe in Luke Walton and his ability to get us to the playoffs. And I think that was very, very telling.
Lina, I loved your introduction, your 2 favorite Sacramento sports reporters, and then Matt George is here, right?
And Matt George.
Oh, no, I meant that these are, the people and where you can find them.
I appreciate it. It's a term of endearment to me, and it's perfect, too, because I'm guilty of what Sean Cunningham is talking about, overhyping the offseason and making it sound a million times more important than it actually is. But damn it, I believe it as long as it gets me through these summer months. I agree with Sean 100%, though. It's very... It's a relief to get such a big offseason question out of the way right away. Like, okay, we know Luke Walton is going to still be here, which is funny. I love how Luke Walton put it when he was asked about it earlier today too. He said, look, I was under contract. I was under the idea that I was going to be here the entire time. So I don't know why everyone's making such a big deal about it. It was, I assumed I was going to be here. So in a way, it almost felt like, Monte McNair just made a hire today in a way, just by committing to a head coach that he initially didn't hire. So I think the big thing now is Luke is now Monty's guy. Luke has Monty is now committed to Luke Walton, and the quote that Sean talked about, saying that he's the guy to lead the Kings to the playoffs, that puts pressure on his plate, that puts pressure on the shoulders of Luke Walton and the rest of this team. But I like it. It's clear everybody's on the same page. The goal is very obvious for next season, and now we can proceed knowing that there's not going to be more turnover on that bench when it comes to coaching staffs.
Absolutely. And we've heard since March that Luke Walton had confidence in his staying here in Sacramento, that he and Monty talk regularly, that they have a good relationship. And I think a lot of people expected him to stay here after there was no big move made leading up to or after the All-Star break, to hear that he and Monty had conversations during this struggle period for this team. And they saw it through, and they both agree that they're on the same page. And
so crazy.
Sorry, that was an autoplay on the YouTube. My bad. You're on mute, Sean.
Pick that up again right when you were coming off of Matt with the absolutely. I'll just edit it.
Yeah. Okay. So
everybody look straight real quick.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. And we've heard from Luke Walton since as early as March that he had confidence in his staying here in Sacramento, that he and Monty have a very good working relationship, that they talk regularly. And I think a lot of people expected him to stay here after there was no big move made leading up to the All-Star break or after the All-Star break, when the Kings kind of hit a skid where his job security was put into question. And we've seen reports that he was one of the handful of coaches in the league that could be on the hot seat. But again, he is going into his third season here in Sacramento with his second general manager at the helm. And they both feel the pressure of the fans and the history that they have in this dysfunction that has been around for almost 2 decades. And in a moment, we'll probably be able to touch on the last great era of Sacramento basketball with the Hall of Fame inductees announced today, or earlier this week, I should say. But, to hear not only Monty express his confidence in Luke Walton, but De'Aaron Fox also say, we know what's going on in this organization. We know what's happening internally, and he has the support of his players, as we've heard from several players in the locker room, and Monty echoed that as well. And I do want to talk about De'Aaron Fox also, because this was our first time really being able to talk to him in several weeks, since he's been out with COVID-19 health and safety protocols for the remainder of the season since late April. He doesn't know where he got the virus. He said that he tested positive, likely in between the 2 Minnesota games that they had in late April. He and his fiance, one person he said experienced symptoms. That was clearly him, with admitted headaches and body aches and chills. And he was winded. He did not feel the same when he was back out on the court on 2-on-2 action. And we didn't see him again this season. So I'm kind of curious, what you guys thought of hearing him say that. He's the 4th Kings player still on the roster, at least, that admitted or confirmed that they actually tested positive for the virus, with Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, and Marvin Bagley in that group as well. So what was your thoughts on that, and hearing Fox kind of just detail his experience?
Well, for me, it came at an interesting time, because I never once thought, after De'Aaron was out with health and safety protocols, that we weren't going to see him again. I thought, of course, we'll see him again. Finely tuned athlete, conditioned, all that stuff. And to hear his battle and hearing it literally just a day ago, or today, excuse me, and it coming on the heels of me just interviewing a UFC athlete, a former champion, in Cody Garbrandt, who, for people who don't know, not only had COVID, but is considered one of the long haulers. His situation, where he was testing positive for months at a time, dealing with blood clots, having to be on blood thinners, having pneumonia, all these things. So hearing De'Aaron, and I'm looking at Cody, and I'm like, you'd expect that more from someone who looks like me, not Cody Garbrandt. And that's just the dangerousness of this, and the unpredictability of this disease, and how it affects everyone different, this virus. So to hear De'Aaron kind of chronicle what he went through, first of all, kudos to him for doing that, because I think people, I know each person may feel different about it in the fact of, maybe I don't want to share this, it's a private medical matter, but I do think it's worth sharing for people, especially because there's so much that people don't know about the virus. So kudos for him. And you can see just a guy who really had a hard time even coming back, having to go through protocols, even though he was no longer in that infectious state and he's around his team again. That's fine. We saw that with Hassan Whiteside earlier in the season, when he in fact tested positive and was able to come back. And everyone's like, wait a minute, he's still under the health and safety protocols under the NBA, but he's around his team. The infectious period's gone. He still has to get his conditioning, his wind, things of that nature back. So it's, you could just really see what kind of a toll it took on him. And I appreciate his honesty, for sure.
I believe, Sean, it was you that asked him if there was anything about it that I think surprised him or caught him off guard about it, or things that he didn't expect. And I thought his answer was interesting. He said, no, I got everything that I kind of expected or had been hearing about, but it almost seemed like Fox now respected it a little bit more. Like, it's one thing to hear about it and another to go through it completely. And every time I think about NBA players going through COVID and trying to recover from COVID, my mind instantly goes to a friend of De'Aaron Fox from his draft class, Jason Tatum, who is still on an inhaler and is still dealing with the after effects of COVID-19. And with a game like basketball that's so endurance based, especially for a player like Fox, who plays as hard and as fast and as downhill as he does, I can imagine the hesitation to want to come back. Lina, you referenced his answer earlier today, talking about how before the trip to Memphis for those 2 games in Memphis at the end of the season that he participated in 2-on-2, he said he tried playing half court and full court, and he said it was really tough for him to get through. So if Fox, a player that relies on his athleticism, speed, and burst, is having a hard time working his way through a 2-on-2 game in a practice facility, no wonder he said he wasn't anywhere close to coming back, even if the games were meaningful. I wonder too, I threw out this hypothetical on the Locked On Kings podcast, and I guess thankfully we never got to get that far. But if that bench unit, that second unit that had kept the Kings in it, had won that important game against San Antonio or closed the gap and actually made the play-in tournament, would De'Aaron and some of these players have forced themselves to be made available to participate for the Kings and their chances to make the playoffs? If they actually made the playoffs and had a legitimate 7-game series or best of 7 series, would Fox have pushed himself to come back then? So maybe in a weird, twisted way, them not making it is a good thing for Fox. I'm glad he didn't play, but I thought it was interesting to see how much he now looks like he respects COVID-19 now that he's undergone it.
Yeah, and obviously we are just happy to see that he's well and healthy. He and his fiance are doing well, he said. And we did hear from a couple other players, of course. One that is going to be the talk of the town, I think, for the next several months is Rashaan Holmes. And we heard Luke Walton raving about the big man today. He will be entering. He can become a free agent this summer. He is due a payday after being the starting center here for the last 2 seasons, winning the job after Dwayne Dedmon. They kind of broke the bank for him, and then he did not pan out the way that they needed to in the first handful of games in the 2019 season. So, or 2018 season, I should say. So what are we expecting in terms of that move? We heard, Monty McNair also say, complimentary things about Rashaan and what he's been able to do. This is not his first stop in the league. He's been around a little bit, but this is really where he's had career performances, a breakout kind of season. I mean, he was in a campaign for the All-Star roster. I mean, early going. Still a lot of work to be done, of course, but what do you expect in terms of his staying here in Sacramento or moving on after this stint here?
Well, I think Monty was absolutely honest, much like Luke. He just didn't use the language Luke used because Luke made it pretty obvious that he really wants Rashaan Holmes back. But again, he's going to be loyal to his player. Monty has a decision to make, and fortunately, he has the draft to do that ahead of time before free agency begins, because I think they have a number in mind, and I think there's people out there that think Rashaan can get a lot more. Maybe not a lot more, maybe a little more. So I think it's all about where they're willing to draw the line to retain his services. I think they definitely like to do so. But I also know that maintaining flexibility is something that Monty McNair has absolutely just banged the drum consistently, that they want to keep going forward. They want to be able to take advantage of big moves, small moves, whatever it looks like. They want to be a player. So I don't know that they're completely married to the fact that they'll bring Rashaan Holmes back. I think there is a bit of a question mark there. Fortunately, well, I should say unfortunately, I think Rashaan Holmes would actually be the perfect candidate for restricted free agency. And some people might bristle at that because with restricted free agency, you go find your deal, and then you have the time to decide whether or not you want to match that deal or even facilitate a sign and trade. Some teams would use that as possibly okay, well, we'll sign the offer sheet. Worst case scenario, we're keeping Rashaan Holmes, but we're really forcing Sacramento's hand to have to overpay for this kid. So Rashaan is unrestricted. He can go find his own deal. It's going to be the most money he's ever made. I feel absolutely sensational for him. I couldn't be more happy for him and his family. Hopefully it falls in line with what the Kings, because I mean, just dealing with him day to day, I mean, I would love to be able to continue to do that. But I've had people tell me throughout the league for the better part of a year that if Rashaan Holmes is your starting center, you're probably not that good. And some people look at him as more of a power forward. I know this positionless basketball. Someone's got to be good, and someone has to shine on a team that's awful. So you always want to keep that in mind. And that's just being purely objective there. And possibly, if he goes and signs a nice contract somewhere, the Rashaan Holmes production you saw in Sacramento, might look a little different at the place that he may end up.
There's a pain in my belly, Sean, with the harsh truth there of, you're right, being the best center on a bad basketball team. How good is that really? But truthfully, I hope Rashaan gets the biggest bag he can get as long as he's still wearing a jersey that says Kings along the front of it. But at the same time, too, I'm wrestling with the idea of the Kings forcing themselves or cornering themselves into basically bringing the overall same group back. Like, I know now Luke Walton is coming back as the head coach, but I think Sacramento, Monty McNair, the Kings would really be foolish to just, for the most part, run the same group back with minor tweaks. I think if you're bringing Rashaan Holmes back, then you have to be exploring Marvin Bagley deals, or you have to be exploring what potential market value Buddy Hield or Harrison Barnes have. And like Monty said a number of times, the word he used was aggressive. They are going to be aggressive to try and make moves this offseason, whether that's aggressively improve, aggressively add two-way type talent, or just look for defenders to fix the awful defensive problem. Overall, I personally feel like if the core of this team, not the core of Fox and Haliburton, but if the core of this team remains largely the same going into next season, we're going to see and experience the same problems. So that's really my hesitation with bringing Rashaan Holmes back. Pretty much my only hesitation with bringing Rashaan back, because I think he's an excellent fit for the Sacramento Kings. He does everything that seemingly the Kings ask of him, other than I guess he could have a better 3-point shot. I would love to see Rashaan still in a Kings uniform, but I do think this team doesn't have to make drastic changes, not a roster overhaul. But if they look the same next year, their peak is the play-in tournament, right?
Right. And actually, Lina, before, I just want to point out something, because when you look at that, I think it's so telling too, because we talked a lot about it at the time it happened, these moves that they brought in, not just the trade deadline, 3 of those 4 players that they bring in, Mo Harkless, DeLon Wright, and Terrence Davis, became absolute rotational, integral parts to everything that they're doing good. You get some guys that fall off because of injuries, but those guys, and granted, I'll point out they went on a 9-game losing streak again during when these guys were a factor. But you see the likes of Chimezie Metu really kind of peaking. You see the likes of Luke King coming in and all of a sudden having a nice game. Damian Jones comes in on a 10-day, earns a roster spot. All 3 of those players are non-guaranteed for next year, but they're, at least you've got some flexibility there. My point is like the core of this team is, and we've talked about it, is so soft. So like when you can bring in pedestrian NBA players that not only play hard, but play with a give a damn and physicality, and oh, by the way, they address defense with those guys, I think that sends a really big message to what you have with your quote unquote core people. So to me, I'm with you, Matt. I don't know that they're necessarily going to blow it up, and Monty is not going to show his hand. Is it a tweak here, a tweak there? Is there something out there that they're identifying? How's the draft? Your most attractive piece on your entire roster will be whatever this draft pick ends up being, likely a top 10 pick. So maybe you're dangling that carrot out there. Maybe you don't need another young player out of this draft crop to add to your roster. So they've got a lot of decisions to make, and maybe having that draft pick and attaching it to a contract that might be bloated. Harrison Barnes, you mentioned it, Matt. Buddy Hield, another one like that. It's hard to do that with Marvin Bagley because he didn't have a really big contract, and as we've argued for the past better part of 3 years now, you how do you trade unproven talent? You're not that good. So Marvin's kind of like that least of their worries. So, and you mentioned with Luke, it's like, yeah, you're rolling back Luke, but at least you're not making a commitment to him. He's only under contract for the next 2 years. With Rashaan, you're upwards of 4 years, 5 years. So it's a tough position to put in. I think, like I said, it's super beneficial that they're going to have the draft before free agency, because I think that's going to open up a lot of windows for them and eliminate some of those options. And once we get into draft time, I think we're going to know whether or not they're going to be putting a bullseye on Rashaan.
Absolutely. All good points. And we've seen obviously success in the first draft with Monty McNair's selection of Tyrese Haliburton, a steal at 12. I mean, he was one of the bright spots of this, again, disappointing season. I mean, he won Rookie of the Month 2 times in a row, right up there with LaMelo Ball early in the Rookie of the Year conversations, in the mix with Anthony Edwards as well. He did experience some time sidelined with injury, the calf strain earlier in the year. And then, of course, the hyperextended knee that kept him out for the final 8 games of the season. And that was a scary moment in Dallas, crossing half court and then just, his knee buckling and him sliding to the ground and just kind of writhing in pain there for a moment. But I mean, we heard from him earlier this week as well, and he is thankful that it wasn't the 3-letter word, as he said, and we all are, of course. He seemed very thankful that it wasn't a worst case scenario, but he wasn't able to resume basketball activities, as we heard. He's still kind of getting back into the groove of moving up and down like he used to, and he's looking forward to getting healthier and bigger, bulking up over the off season as he grows into his man body, as he said in his own words. But just your overall takeaways from Tyrese Haliburton in his first season in Sacramento. I mean, the kid overcame so much, the shortened off season, no summer league, all of the just tumult of joining this organization. He came in with, these stars in his eyes. I'm going to help this team get to the playoffs. And it doesn't matter if I get Rookie of the Year. I want to do this. And he's realizing it's going to be a little bit harder than maybe he even imagined. And he's losing more than he has in his entire career as a 21-year-old superstar to be. He's already received national attention, a lot of potential there. And we heard from De'Aaron Fox today. I mean, the way and the language that he used in talking about him and Ty running this backcourt for years to come and being a terror, hopefully, in the Western Conference with the speed and the flair that they both play with. Assessment of Tyrese Haliburton. What did you like? What did you most impressed you about this kid? And what do you see really in the future of this team with him being the newest addition?
With non-contact injuries, it's very rare that you get the best case scenario. So I thought it was kind of cool that Tyrese shared with us, like he felt like he caught a break or he got a second chance almost. When you experience something like that, immediately assume the worst. And then I guess the best turns out that you're not that injured and you're going to be okay and able to work this summer and get back to normal pretty quickly instead of almost a year's worth or maybe sometimes over a year's worth of rehab. So I thought that was kind of cool to experience the positive side of that. But what was really interesting out of all of Tyrese Haliburton's comments is the main thing I sympathize with him, and maybe this is just the fanhood over the basketball side. He didn't really get to experience the NBA really and real NBA life in his first year. And he talked a lot about how much he's looking forward to being able to spend time with his teammates outside of regulations, like being able to go out with his teammates or be able to just talk with them, hang out with them, not be so regulated with when they can come into the practice facility. And not to mention getting the real Sacramento fan experience, not this sprinkle a couple thousand in there and pretend the place is full. So Tyrese, in a way, has not even begun to fully experience what the NBA lifestyle is like. And that's what makes me so excited, is the fact that he's this good without experiencing that side of things. And then you mentioned De'Aaron Fox's comments, right? How he sees Fox and Haliburton, the two of them together, as that backcourt that can play together for years to come. He said that for years to come, which excites me. It should excite every fan in Sacramento who wants to be able to hold on to something good long term. But also what Tyrese has said really since the beginning of this season resonates in my head too, that he's here to win right now. The playoffs are the goal right now. The playoffs are the goal next season. And a lot has to happen, especially on the defensive end. Luke Walton talked about how this team needs to make their improvements immediately starting this offseason. They can't wait for next season to start improving their defense and improving on their struggles this year. So I imagine that Tyrese is going to have that same mindset and that same work ethic as a whole this offseason. And I look forward to seeing the results come September, October, November.
And I can't stress this enough. I don't want him to change. Don't become that hardened athlete. Let this all be new. Let this all just stay how you were. You were talking about how he hasn't had that moment off the court, Matt, when they're on the road or, the bonding elements or whatever. He's got the video game. He used JJ Redick's podcast. I mean, he's got ways to try to keep it. He's always doing something. And one of the things that really struck me being in the arena, especially when he was injured, is watching how he interacts with his teammates. He's like another coach on the sideline. He never sits down. And when he does, it's usually to speak to a teammate as they're coming off the floor. Like De'Aaron walking to going to the cool off table and once De'Aaron gets back from the cool off seat to come back to his regular seat, Ty's waiting for him to talk to him, pick his brain, say what he saw. He's doing it not only for a guard, but even a big man. Shemezi Metu's coming out there and he's telling him all these different things. It's like, I mean, maybe you would argue that maybe that could be annoying for this 20-year-old, but I think it looks great. And Luke Walton made it a point saying, not in his exit interviews today, but actually before the finale, I believe, against Utah, of just how Tyrese has been. He almost called it, I forget who posed the question, but they were like, sorry if this is like choosing your favorite kid, but who's been like the standout, most surprising athlete to you on your team? And he says, well, I don't have a problem picking a favorite kid either, but he said it was Tyrese Haliburton because of things that you're just talking about. No summer league, a condensed schedule, no training camp. And now all of a sudden, he may not need those things. He may not need a summer league. Maybe he goes out there and still works out with the team, doesn't need to play. We'll see how that all takes shape. We don't really know what summer league looks like yet, but they're definitely going to have it. And I think Ty will be a part of it. It's great that injury wasn't worse. I mean, that's a huge, huge relief. But yeah, I mean, it's easily the biggest bright spot. I'd even put over De'Aaron because at least you knew De'Aaron was still having this upward trajectory. With Tyrese Haliburton, you didn't know if it would click right now, maybe 3 years down the road. Who knows? I mean, we heard so many good things, but I think the one thing I can say that I wouldn't even say it's a negative. He did hit a wall. I think we saw that. So clearly there's going to be some training wheels coming off next year. And I think some expectations that come along with it, but if they want those two to start alongside each other, even if it's a 3-guard lineup with Buddy Hield, DeLon Wright, who is under contract for next year, becomes all that more important because they didn't have that other playmaker. I know we had Corey Joseph here in Sacramento, but he wasn't that type of playmaker. He did what he could. DeLon Wright is an upgrade in that regard. Maybe not on the defensive side, even though he does come up with steals, I think. But you almost need even another playmaker on top of that. So the only reason we didn't see Tyrese in that starting rotation was because the lack of playmaking on this team.
My favorite part about Tyrese too is you're right. He did hit that wall and he was the first one to tell you that he hit that wall and how much he holds himself accountable, how he holds himself to such a high standard. I remember his first, I think it was a preseason game, right? How he was nervous and scared and he was not afraid to share that with us because that's just part of his personality. Look, I was starstruck for the first few minutes. And then once I got through that, I was able to actually play the game of basketball. And then
he was going up against Steph Curry twice.
Right, exactly. And then he talks about, man, I'm passing too much. I need to score more. And then slowly starting to figure out how he can be a scorer while also bringing that facilitating side of things. I'm just excited to see how smart he is today. Doug Christie loves to use the term when the game starts to slow down and you don't have to think the game anymore. You just react naturally. Tyrese is already miles ahead, in my opinion, of what most rookies are in that element. So what is he going to be when he reaches the fourth year that De'Aaron Fox was in? And we saw how much of a leap De'Aaron took in this fourth year. I'm just excited to see the development of Tyrese Haliburton. Hopefully it's always going to be in a Kings jersey. I certainly don't want him anywhere else. But Tyrese is one of those guys where regardless of where he plays, even if the Kings didn't draft him, if a smarter team had taken him before 12, I would have been a fan of the young man. It's impossible not to be.
And Lina, we've been talking about Tyrese Haliburton here and all year, and we never mention his shot as something that has always came up regarding him and the reason he slipped or whatever conspiracy theory you want to believe. There was concerns over this hitch and this weird shot that he has, and it does look weird. But I always think of Kevin Martin because I remember him slipping in the draft because you're coming out of Western Kentucky, or Western Carolina, no one knows who the hell you are, and you got this really weird shot where it looks like you're pulling your gun out of a holster and shooting it from your chest, and it is weird. But I mean, that dude's money. I mean, he's absolutely lives for those clutch moments too.
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment where it was like, we need a nickname for fourth quarter Ty Haliburton. Like he's, 6 weeks into the league and he's already, impressing so many people. I mean, and that was the consistent, you mentioned the wall, and yes, he hit the wall. And I just think to that moment that Sean, that you captured on your camera of Luke Walton and him having a conversation during one of the games. And he took it like a man. He said, okay, I'm going to do whatever the coach is saying. And I think that that's so, so impressive to watch. You mentioned, like, I loved seeing him walking around with the iPad, going up to his teammates on the bench, talking to Rico, talking to Bobby, and just wanting to be involved, wanting to help, wanting to communicate, and just being involved however he can, because, he's being looked at as a leader, and he understands that, and he needs to walk the walk and talk the talk. And you see him out there before the game's getting shots up with Rico, after the game's getting shots up. He's the first one to say that he sucked whatever night, if he only scored 2 points and dished out 3 assists or something. So I think that that's really refreshing and impressive to see, echoed from Luke Walton to Monty to Harrison Barnes, Corey Joseph, his vet. And if this is where he's starting out in his NBA career, I mean, like you said, the sky's the limit. His trajectory is on the up and up for sure. And we saw a lot of promise this season. So hopefully he gets a nice, healthy off season, and we can see him, make another leap like we saw the likes of De'Aaron Fox make in between this last bubble season and even to this year. And we also heard from Marvin Bagley, and I think that was a topic that needed to be addressed. And, Sean, you were very quick to ask Monty what went into that decision to allow him to leave the team and go home to Phoenix when he was nursing that broken bone in his hand. We know that injuries have plagued Marvin Bagley in his 3rd season here. It seems like he's only played maybe 2 in Sacramento because he's been down with various injuries. And, he did show a lot of growth and development this year. That was, again, one of the takeaways from what was a disappointing season. You can look to what he was able to do in the games that he was healthy for and able to play in. And again, Sean, you like to use the term buzzard luck. And yes, that's absolutely what he's had. But I think it was a bit delicate to talk to him about how he felt about being in Sacramento and how he sees himself kind of fitting in. And I think it was the question really that James Ham had that kind of you saw that tension, right? Where it was like, you're acknowledging the conversations that are happening in social circles and among Kings Twitter or among the media or rumors that are kind of swirling around his dedication maybe to the team and being in Sacramento. I mean, he said he was very excited and blessed to put on an NBA jersey, not specifically maybe a Sacramento Kings jersey, and, careers can take you anywhere, but, there's been just some, I guess, question marks about his fit here, if he will be staying here long-term, if he was going to be dealt away, if he was happy. Obviously, unfortunately, his dad has been part of the conversation in terms of Marvin Bagley's just overall existence on this team and what he says to the media about what his dad says on social media. So, I think that there were just a lot of points that needed to be addressed in our offseason availability with him and the general manager. And he, didn't get into specifics, but they said that there was a plan in place to allow Marvin to basically take this time to be away from the team, heal up and get back. So, Sean, I'm curious, what was your initial reaction and thoughts on getting that response from Monty after this was kind of a topic of conversation in our media circle and around fans, really?
Yeah, I mean, the whole NBA is puzzled by it. It's like, look, it was a terrible look, because even if you're trying to trade him, you're essentially, how do you help his value by saying, okay, I'm going to try and trade Marvin. Okay, we sent him home. The media is reporting that you've sent him back to his family in Phoenix to be away from the team. That just devalued him. Why would you and now everyone's looking to fleece you for Marvin Bagley. They're not going to offer you what they probably could offer or even think to offer if someone's out there that wants to bet on the talent and feel that he's just in an awful situation. It's stupid. And to be honest, Lina, I'm glad you asked, because I was going to bring it up. Monty had to be asked twice about it. I had to follow up and be like, hey, bro, you didn't ask the question. You didn't answer the question. I know we're on Zoom, but I had to make sure that we were getting those answers, because even if he's not going to totally spill it and say, yes, Sean, yes, Sacramento media, we were trying to trade Marvin Bagley, or we just felt that whatever the reason might be, it looks like this is what it looks like. Even on the face of it, it looks like this kid is still a child, needed to be around his family again. I know that it happened really kind of along the All-Star break, but he stayed down there. He was getting treatment from a doctor, and you're enabling this. This guy is a guy who has been away because of injuries. He's already getting a soft label as it is, and he needs all the experience he can get. He's in his second NBA season in his third NBA year. And, you know, this was a very important season. I still think Marvin, to his credit, showed the growth and improvement and maybe brought some people back again to go, man, yeah, okay, we see it again. We see it again. We see that there is that potential, but can he stay healthy? And that's the biggest question. Can he stay healthy? And is he soft? Like, can he get away from that soft label? Fortunately, this kid loves to work. He loves basketball. He has changed. I had to ask him that question the other day. I remember that kid that got off the plane with a ball in his hand. I remember we were on the same flight to Vegas for Summer League. He went down with his family. He literally, the new kid in town, he's on a Southwest flight. He's carrying a basketball in his hands to go to Vegas for Summer League. I had to ask him, I was like, how far away does that feel? He's like, I'm a completely different person. He still loves the game, but he knows he's got a lot to prove. He has that chip on his shoulder. I think he's completely, bogged down by what happens on social media. His dad's a big part of that, but dads are dads. I mean, they're going to be, they are what they are, as if he's the only, it is awkward. But the problem is if you're an organization, you don't let that become a problem. Let the dad do what he does. It doesn't matter. You still don't let that run the roost. And when you do, then that makes it look like you don't know what the hell you're doing and it's amateur hour over there. I'm not saying that's the case, but it wasn't a good look. I didn't agree with it. Fortunately, Marvin came back and looked really good in some of those games. And I think that's really what he needs. I'm always worried about the kid's confidence, because the minute that goes away, you're done. Once you lose your confidence, it's really hard to get it back. And the other thing I would say too is these injuries with him that he's experienced, fortunately, they're not all the same. It's not another knee injury. It's not this. It's not like what we experienced with Harry Giles. It's, okay, I've had a foot, I've had a leg injury. He had a really scary, much like Ty did. He almost had the same kind of injury in his rookie season that everyone was like, oh my God, he's down holding his knee. What's happening? Fortunately, it wasn't bad. You were talking about broken bones. It's not, oh, my knee's sore, my leg's sore, my back's sore, I'm sitting out, because, these are legit, he's breaking bones. So I do think there's a little bit to be said there. Steph Curry couldn't stay on the court in his first few years. Domantas Sabonis had the same kind of issues with nagging injuries in his development. And look where these are guys that have gone the way. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Marvin, but you don't really throw the baby out with the bathwater until you get the baby, at least a toddler stage, right?
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's way too early to completely pull the plug on Marvin for any team. But I think what also is added to the bad look, Sean, and Lina, I'm curious about your opinion on this too, is I get the impression the majority of the development Marvin has done in his career has been with his family. In a way, like, of course, the court time is extremely important, but I remember spending a lot of time talking to Marvin and hearing Marvin talking about before the bubble during the hiatus, how much he had worked to get healthy and how much he had worked with his brother, Marcus, and how much he had worked with his team to get used to playing potentially the center position. And then he goes home during this strange injury in the middle of the season, comes back and looks really good. On one hand, I applaud Marvin for staying in shape, staying ready. And on the other hand, it's like, why are you playing better coming back from a little stay at home in Arizona versus playing and being in the practice facility with your teammates? And I just think it looked really, really weird. It was really uncomfortable for me to see Marvin not with the team when Tyrese, his entire time that he was hurt, on the sidelines actively rooting. Same thing with Hassan Whiteside, with the exception of when he was in the health and safety protocols, when he physically couldn't be there. You talk about Chimezie Metu hurting himself after Jonas Valanciunas kind of pulled him off the rim, and he was there on the sidelines every single day. So why is it mandatory?
Matt, what's common is to see it for maybe a game or two where a guy's out, or maybe he's in the back getting treatment or whatever. Maybe he's not with the team for a few days, a week, whatever. This extended absence, no. And all it screams to me is either you sent him home, this kid needed to, you're treating him like a child, or you were coddling this poor behavior, and you can't do that. The Kings have already had a label of being a coddling organization. You don't need to do that. You don't enable bad behavior.
Yeah. And my gut feeling on this entire situation is you don't give away Marvin Bagley for rags and for nothing. You don't do that. He's a former number 2 overall pick, even if it wasn't Monty's pick. So Monty's not on the hook for the selection, but he is on the hook if he lets Marvin just walk for rags. Marvin goes to a different organization and suddenly turns into, even if it's not an all-star like he had the potential to be, but even if it's a solid, 15 and 10, 20 and 10 guy, whether it's as a starter or off the bench, I believe Marvin can become that. I believe he can do that if he just stays on the floor, even not knowing half of what he's capable of. And the reality is, when I look at Marvin as a whole, take away the off the court stuff, take away him going home to Arizona, take away the drama with what his family and family members said on social media. From the beginning of the season to the last game that Marvin played, I saw clear development. He looked better defensively. He looked like he was getting his offense in the flow of the offense. He wasn't as tunnel vision. He was looking to pass the ball. His 3-point shot, how smooth it was, how confident he was with it, to me was the brightest spot of this entire season for Marvin. Of course, I want to see it more. I was upset that he came back, played well, and then got hurt again for the remainder of the season because they sure could have used him during that play-in stretch. But I still can't shake the gut feeling that Monty and the Kings are going to be dangling him out there, shopping him to see what they could potentially get, maybe packaging this year's draft pick with him to get something of value in return. Maybe it is a piece that doesn't have as high of potential as Marvin, but someone who can help this team win right away. Because I look at the developmental timeline and I look at where Fox is. I look at where Haliburton is. To me, Tyrese Haliburton is either just barely past or well past what Marvin Bagley's at right now. If Marvin's going to be part of your core, don't you want him to be on the same timeline as them? And I have questions about how far back he truly is still, even though he's going into his 4th season, which is absolutely crazy.
Well, and nobody's untouchable, Lina. I mean, these guys, Monty McNair should wake up every day looking to trade everybody. When you're 31 and 41 and 15 straight losing seasons and you're on the hook for just one of those, I mean, it's you're trying to get better. So yeah, you need to know the market value of every one of these players. And to Marvin, I'd say, you know what, because you made a good point, Matt. I get the same sense. Yes, everything has come from the father from a development standpoint. This Kings team has done a really good job in helping develop a lot of things with these players, but I'd keep him with Richaun Holmes all summer. I wouldn't let him leave the house. If the family's back in Sacramento, whether they're in Sacramento or they're in Phoenix, doesn't matter. You're staying with Rico.
Yeah, Rico seems to be, the go-to guy. If you want to get better and you want to have some bite, go to Richaun Holmes because he's going to get you right. And he has been a great addition to this coaching staff. And clearly he's bringing out something in a lot of these players that they need to have on a consistent basis. And we've heard, again, the buzzwords of this season were consistency or inconsistency, physicality and defense. We'll see if they're able to improve on that in leaps and bounds because it was a rough stretch for some of these games where you're getting 130 scored on you. And it's just, it was painful to watch some of that and painful for these guys to experience. I mean, again, these are high level basketball players. And we heard, Harrison Barnes wrapping up year 9 saying, my bad is not good enough. Like we have to start. And we've heard that repeatedly, accountability, holding each other accountable, calling each other out, all of that. But obviously it's not clicking at the level that it needs to find success on the court every single night.
Can I quote Michael Malone?
Of course you can, Sean. You're quoting Michael Malone. When does that happen?
Michael Malone with the famous words, "My bad gets your ass kicked." It's absolute. That's got to be the mentality. I'm so glad that Harrison's been saying this for the better part of the year. By the way, we're too immature. We don't have. We're not ready for prime time. He's calling guys out, and it's not hard to really try to pinpoint guys he's really trying to deliver messages to. But even as a collective group, it's like, no, you guys have to sustain. You've got to show like you give a damn. And my bad isn't good enough. I'm so glad to hear that from Harrison.
Well, and we heard that, Dave Yeager was the guy who said, we have a bunch of nice guys.
Got a lot of nice guys. Love it. I'll introduce him to my daughter.
And even still, he led the team to its winningest season since they made the playoffs, right? So, and that didn't even keep his job security. So, we'll see how Luke Walton is able to navigate, his second season under Monty McNair, in his first GM role here in Sacramento. I mean, he can only go up from here, folks. So I think that even though there's a lot of pressure, as we said,
or down.
Or down, you're right. Sean, you've seen some stuff in your time of covering this team. And even Jason Jones said, I forget which game it was, but there was a conversation inside Golden One Center among some of us media members, like, is this one of the worst games you have ever seen this team play? And that was actual conversations that were had this year.
Yeah. And the other part too, sorry, Matt, I was going to say, I mean, you've got a lot of people, I mean, and media falls into this a lot too. There's these discussions about, as it pertains to Luke Walton, and look, Luke's not the greatest coach out there. I've certainly been critical of Luke. But if you're putting a lot of this blame on the shoulders of Luke Walton, you're not watching this team the right way. I mean, Luke Walton can't play defense for these guys. Certainly he gets blamed for not being a faster team. Look at your point guard. He slows down himself. The Ferrari on the team slows down himself. He doesn't sustain it. I mean, that's not Luke's waving him up like this. Dave Yeager did the same thing. People thought Dave Yeager, he can't play fast under Dave Yeager. Look at those Grizzlies. They played with pace. They weren't breakneck speed. What ended up happening that year in Sacramento? Breakneck speed. And Yeager's waving him up like this all the time. So it doesn't always fall on the head coach. And I know there's a lot of criticism out there. Oh, Vladdy, he only interviewed one. He got the one guy, didn't interview anyone else. If people don't remember this, Luke Walton was the guy he wanted even before Dave Yeager. He interviewed a slew of people. He didn't get the guy he wanted because he went to the Lakers, right? Interviewed a slew of people that were available. Dave Yeager gets fired on a Thursday. He's in Sacramento on Saturday doing his press conference. That's how quickly things happened with that. So when Luke Walton gets hired, Vladdy got the guy he wanted. So it was a vetted coach. It's who he wanted. I know, I mean, don't let reality get in the way of a good story. You could interview 1,000 head coaches. It doesn't matter. Go out and interview them all. It doesn't matter. That doesn't mean you're going to get a great head coach. You just get the guy you're comfortable with. And you know what? I use that as an example. Every team is bleeding money, and people go, oh, if they're making money decisions, they're not a good NBA team. Every team makes money decisions, okay? They have to make sound business choices. That doesn't mean these aren't basketball choices. If there was a guy out there that they wanted over Luke Walton, they'd go get him, and they'd damn the costs. I truly believe that. It's only 2 years. It's only 2 years. This team has paid 4 head coaches at one time, 3 head coaches at one time for the greater part of this ownership's tenure. So I'm not trying to say that I'm going to stick up for ownership in this regard, but the last thing they've been is frugal or cheap. They pay money. Now, look, Monty McNair is probably the lowest paid general manager in the league, so I will point that out. But again, if there's a guy you want, they'll go get him. And if they're and what if I said this to some of these haters? If getting a coach like Michael Malone, what if Denver doesn't get to the Western Conference Finals this year? What if next year they don't get to the Western Conference Finals and Michael Malone's fired again? And all of a sudden this time next year, Luke Walton's fired with a year remaining on his deal, and they go get Michael Malone as a head coach. Would you take it?
Yep.
I think every Kings fan, because everyone thinks that Michael Malone got screwed. It doesn't matter if Michael Malone's the greatest coach in the world. Kings fans will treat him as such because they don't know any better. Everyone thinks he got screwed. So those are the things that matter. I mean, it totally, and people, I know they hate Luke. I mean, I'm looking at my mentions, and I know Twitter's the worst place for this, but I don't expect Luke Walton to get booed on opening night. So it's not a great representation of your fan base. I think a lot of Kings fans are a little bit more sane than that, but there's some people burning their jerseys over not firing Luke Walton. Like, what the hell are you doing? I just don't get it.
Yeah, the extreme reaction is partially expected, unfortunately. And look, 15 years of losing, I guess, would turn everybody insane. But at the same time, too, I do believe there is a majority sane portion of this fan base who doesn't give a damn who's sitting on that bench as long as the Kings are actually playing defense and are winning one day. It doesn't matter who the guy is. Take the worst head coach in the last 15 years, put him here in Sacramento. If the Kings win, nobody's going to care anymore and everybody will celebrate the man. I mean, George Karl is one of those guys that became an ugly story pretty quickly in Sacramento. I guarantee you, if George Karl swapped places with Luke Walton right now and the Kings made the playoffs, there might be a statue of George Karl somewhere next to that Piglet statue in Doco. So it's all reactionary, and I get it, and I understand to some extent. I did understand every argument for wanting to move on from Luke Walton. And my main thing was, if Monty McNair wants to move on from Walton, let him. If Monty McNair wants to keep Walton, let him. As long as Monty McNair is making the decision and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, I'm 100% okay with it. I may disagree.
And Matt, to that point, as Lina can attest, I go on that diatribe because I'm basically saying shame on you people who are saying this about Luke Walton. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I probably would have fired Luke Walton. I mean, Luke Walton, coaches have been fired for a lot less. We just talked about Michael Malone. There's coaches I would have identified. There's coaches that are out there that I would have liked better than Luke Walton for this team. I'm not going to slam Monty McNair for doing it. And this is actually, Lina, we talk about GMs coming in, right? Yes, he didn't hire this head coach, right? Okay. But him actually tying himself to Luke Walton is a decision that he's making. It's not kicking the ball down the road and say, okay, we're now going to grade you off of the next head coach that you replace Luke Walton with. No, he doesn't get grace period just because he's made the decision, him and ownership and the front office, they've made their ownership. You're going to be grading them on this decision as well. So, anyone who thinks that this is like, oh, you get a grace period. No, this was your grace period. This first year was your grace period. It was a failure. It was a colossal failure. You showed the ability to compete. But again, it was a failure in the expectations that they may have had for the beginning of the season. But Lina, what did I say? How did we define success? It had nothing to do with playoffs. It was De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Haliburton, and Marvin Bagley. That was how you define success for this year. And for that reason alone, for the most part, it was probably a success.
I still define success as making the postseason. However, given that was a long shot,
we weren't picking it. We didn't pick it.
I was on the record, I think, saying that I had hope that they would make the play-in. And you know what? They held that hope until game 69 of 72 in the season. So
you were looking like a genius at a certain point, though. I was
at
looking
a certain
like
point. And you know what? I will say also to tie up the kind of Luke Walton head coach thing. I would have loved to have seen Monty Williams get a look when he was available 2 seasons ago. And now here he is winning Coach of the Year with the Suns, leading them out of darkness along with CP3. So I'm not saying that every team can have a Monty Williams situation, but it's possible. Whether or not that will be Luke Walton next season or in 2 seasons, or maybe not him at all. This fan base certainly deserves to have a winning basketball team, some joy after a generation of dysfunction and confusing decisions from the top down. People being on the record saying they did not want to come to Sacramento, or they did not know much about Sacramento outside of maybe their supportive fans, because it's just been a losing organization. And the guys that are on this roster that we've heard from so far this offseason availability and throughout the season, really, they understand the weight that's on their shoulders when they put the jersey on and they have all those people waiting to see a winning product on the floor, and a quality product. Whether you're winning or not, at least don't get blown out by 40 points and be trailing by 30 after you're up by 10 going into halftime. So I think they all understand the expectation, the responsibility, and the work that's going to be they're going to need to put in, right, to make this happen. Defense obviously is going to be the focus from Monty McNair and the guys who experienced these humiliating losses. I mean, we heard those words coming out of their mouth, embarrassing, humiliating, like throughout the season multiple times. Nobody wants to have 2 9-game losing streaks. I think that was the first time in history that's happened. I mean, they were historically bad this year, and there were still moments where there was a little bit of hope that they might be able to crack the top 10. That was not the case. So we are looking forward to seeing what moves are made in this offseason. If there are any more splash hires, fires, trades, moves, anything like that, we'll be here bringing you the latest. But before I let you guys go, I do want to say we do have something to celebrate in Sacramento over the weekend with the announcement of the 2021 Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame class, with really 5, I think, basketball legends with ties to Sacramento. being part of this class, headlined, of course, by none other than your boy, Sean Cunningham, Chris Webber. I mean, his jersey's hanging from the rafters. 5 times he's been named a finalist. And finally, we said that this might have been the year that it actually happens, and it did. So Chris Webber, the headliner, his coach, Rick Adelman, alongside him in that Hall of Fame class. Yolanda Griffith, WNBA All-Star, champion with the Monarchs. Hashtag bring back the Monarchs.
Bring back the Narcs.
Bring them back. No better time. I mean, the WNBA is hot right now. So why not add an expansion team and the most successful pro team here in Sacramento? Bring them back. And then you got Bill Russell, who was, one-time coach. Now he's being enshrined as a coach. He was enshrined as a player several years ago. So we have all of those exciting additions to this year's Hall of Fame class. I'm curious your guys' reactions, takeaways. What's the social conversation happening with some good news happening in the Sacramento basketball world?
Well, first off, I'm curious if Sean, did C-Web ask you to introduce him at the Hall of Fame too? So I hope to see you up there introducing him like that. No, it's awesome to see Chris Webber finally get that nod. It seems like he's been a finalist since the beginning of time. So to see him finally get it is great. But my main celebration is for Rick Adelman. I absolutely adore the man. I grew up adoring the man, idolizing him. He is the epitome of what a coach should be, just from my childhood dreams. And to see him get that nod, see him get that recognition, and it's a nice reminder of what has happened since Adelman was here. The fact that Luke Walton is head coach number 10 since Rick Adelman was fired after the 2006 season. And of course, Adelman, I believe, the only head coach in Sacramento ever to win, which is shocking. But at the same time, too, one of the things Monty McNair talked about in his reasonings for keeping Luke Walton around, not to make this about a Luke Walton thing again, but he talked about stability being very important for this team going forward. And since Rick Adelman was here, the Kings have been a coaching carousel. And there have been players that have sat through 3 to 4 different head coaches in their time in a Kings uniform. I still feel bad for Ben McLemore as a whole. Rick Adelman, to me, is the epitome of what stability can bring in Sacramento. I've never heard a bad thing ever said about Rick, and I'm so excited to see him get that nod. So congratulations, Coach. That's really all I had to say on that.
Yeah, and for me, it's fun because, like you mentioned, I mean, I obviously have a friendship with Chris, but to be able to cover all 3 of those, I mean, I will say before we get to that part, Bill Russell, the Hoops Hall of Fame, their social media conveniently leaving out the Kings where he coached the one season, and it was because it was so. I mean, he was so terrible. He was an awful GM, but legend nonetheless. I mean, Jerry Reynolds. If you can ever pick his brain about Bill Russell, go do it, please. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's special because I got to cover all 3 of those people during the entire stay, for the majority of their entire stay here. Yolanda Griffith is one of the most, next to maybe Ron Artest, as the most competitive athletes I've ever been around, bar none. I mean, just incredible. She could play in the NBA. I'm that convinced of her talent. She was unbelievable. Watching that championship run, I want to see the Monarchs back in Sacramento in the worst way. Covering the WNBA was an absolute pleasure. It was supported, and it's been amazing to see where it is today. When Sacramento lost the Monarchs, I ultimately didn't have faith in the league going forward. I thought, okay, 3 years from now, this is going to be a defunct league. Once Lauren Jackson gets out of here, once, Diana Taurasi retires, who's still going. I'm just thrilled to see where it's at. So I hope that comes back. But yes, Chris and Rick, I mean, the first coach I ever covered as a media member. Matt, I was younger than you are. And it's just unbelievable to see, to show up then and look around and be like, oh, so this is NBA basketball. And, not that I didn't know, but it's like I'm showing up at the pinnacle of whatever the Kings have reached, and they're reaching it right now, and it's right as I'm getting going, and then it's been just downhill ever since. So I love to see that. I talked to Bobby Jackson today at his basketball training facility that he's doing. Go to bjbasketballacademy.com. You'll see him if you want to get your kids signed up to have Bobby coach them. That's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, talking to him, I mean, he felt like a little piece of him is going in there with not only Chris, but Rick as well. And even Yolanda, he talked about Rick never started Bobby. He was always behind another point guard, even in Houston, and still considers Rick Adelman to be the best coach he's ever played for. And so, yeah, it's going to be a special moment. I hope to be in Springfield. I hope we're there, Lina. I hope it's going to be a huge moment for Sacramento to see 4 of these members with Sacramento ties go in, and Sacramento is going to own Springfield that whole weekend. It'll be crazy.
It's phenomenal, Sean, too, to hear Doug Christie talk about stories with head coach Rick Adelman. Of course, great stories with C-Web as well, but he was speaking with Jason Ross on Sports 1140 KHDK earlier this week about Rick's coaching style, how laid back he was, and how he allowed the Kings to be as flashy as they were with the behind the back passes and the greatest show on court. But what Doug said was Rick's approach to it was, I'm going to allow you to do this, but if you're going to do this, you better do it right and you better be good, because I'm not going to put up with this if you're not going to play to the best of your ability. You can't be flashy and be a bad team. You just look stupid, basically. And Doug brought up a fun kind of story or moment or thing that I guess Rick would do consistently, where the team would be working on something and not getting it, and Rick would kind of not necessarily be present. It would be the assistant coaches kind of working with them, maybe during shoot around before a game. Rick would come out of the tunnel. He'd say one line, turn around and walk back in the tunnel, and everybody would stop, listen to him, and it would change everything of how they handled the rest of practice. So that was the kind of respect that Rick had from his teammates. He trusted them to continue to put in the work, even though he let them have fun and have their flashiness, and they delivered for him. And I think that speaks to the influence of the NBA head coach. And I think every head coach on the planet could learn something from Rick Adelman.
And Doug cracks me up because it's almost like Rick knew he had an awesome team, like these veteran players. Imagine Rick doing that now with this team in Sacramento. It'd be unheard of. Like I would think if Rick Adelman was coaching this team, it'd be a better team. It'd be a little bit more fun to watch, especially on the offensive end. And especially if he had the staff that Rick had when he was here with Coach Krill and his Princeton offense, and Wetzel and Elston Turner and all these things. But the hilarious part about it is, like, yeah, Rick came in and was like, "Yep, I got a good team. Don't fix. No need to fix what's not broken."
Yeah, it's going to be a great moment for Sacramento basketball fans, young and old. Maybe they'll learn a little bit about some of the great players who have graced the capital city, and hopefully, that's a little bit motivation, a little bit of motivation for the guys who are in this locker room now, that you still got a chance to make it if you can figure out how to win basketball games and look good doing it, and maybe add a little flair and flash while you're at it. But we are going to, of course, keep you updated on the latest here on YouTube, on social media as well. You can find me at L Washington TV. I'm Lina Washington, L Washington TV on Twitter. That's Sean Cunningham, and that's Matt George Radio. Go check out the Locked On Kings podcast, your daily source for all things Kings. And if you're into soccer, you can catch us talking a little Sacramento Republic and the seasons as the season continues. And we're off to a good start with at least another pro team that's won a championship in Sacramento, off to a good start this season with a 2-0 record so far. But the Kings closing it out with another disappointing year. We're looking forward to seeing what happens in the seasons to come. Hopefully they'll break through into the playoffs before all is said and done, while we're still on this earth, guys. I don't know how confident you're feeling about that at this point, but I'm so confident.
It's the most important offseason of all time, Sean Cunningham. The most important. Everything we will break down under a microscope, and this is going to be the year.
Imagine 3 years from now when they're contending for a title, and you go, "This is," and I go, "Hey, Matt, remember in 2021 when you thought they hadn't made the play-in tournament, and you thought that was the most important offseason?"
Sean Cunningham, we all know that you will not be working with me for the next 3 years.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Well, if we're all lucky, we'll still be talking Sacramento Kings basketball in the next 3 years. But in the meantime, of course, keep up with the latest on social media and here on YouTube. We'll see you back here next time for the next edition of Kings Talk.